Well, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This is what we want to talk about today. We've been talking about quite a while now, and that is joy. When does anyone use the word joy in kind of a, I'm not talking about almond joy, but I mean joy. It's almost viewed as passé or kind of naive, and to talk about joy is kind of Pollyanna-ish, if you will, and all. But we don't think so. As a Messianic Jewish community, we're coming to understand that joy is one of the most important things that we could pursue after in life. And so we're going to continue our series on the subject. And the first thing I want to do before getting to various passages of Scripture is just note a contrast that I mentioned before, but it's important. And that's the distinction between happiness and joy. And I want to distill it down to this basic difference. That happiness has more to do with temporary feelings dependent on circumstances, okay? So when circumstances are good, you're happy. When circumstances are bad, what? You're not happy, right? And that's true. And happiness is to be pursued, and we get all that. And I'll have to say, too, sometimes the edges between happiness and joy are a little blurred. But joy is something tied to something eternal, like relationship with God and relationship with other people. These things are rooted in the fabric of the way things are. And to pursue joy is to produce something very, very good. But just by way of carrying this little distinction a little further, so let me ask you, getting a new car, H or J, happiness or joy? What do you think? Happiness, wouldn't you say? I think, I'll tell you why. You get a new car. It's sprayed with new smell. You'll love it. It's great. Until you're in the parking lot of Whole Foods and you walk out and there's a ding in the door of your car. Is the car still a source of joy? No. As a matter of fact, you're miserable for a day, because of the ding of the car. So I would agree with you who would view getting a new car as more in the happiness category. Oh, what about a terrific meal? Joy in that deep resonant sense, or more happiness? What do you think? What do you think? Yeah, kind of happiness. A great meal. Listen, we love a great meal. We can go on and on about great meals that Serena makes and go on and on. Okay, let me ask you about this one. An unexpected check comes in the mail. Well, how big was the check? How big was the check? $10. All right, that's happy, right? If you didn't know how to pay for next month's mortgage payment or rent, and a check comes from out of the blue that solves the problem, it might be bordering on the joy side of the equation because you sense that God is up to something. And there, again, joy is tied to the great transcendent truths about the universe and about our relationship to God. So that one maybe depends on the circumstances. Maybe they all do in a sense. Oh, let me ask you about this one. How about a magnificent sunset? Where do you put it? I'm with you. Why? Because a sunset is evocative of things that are transcendent and eternal. It's God's creative glory manifest in the world through atmospheric conditions and all. I put it in the joy category, but we recognize, not everyone may agree, but I put it there. Oh, what about this one? What about this one? Ready? Wait for it. Here it comes. Coffee Oreo ice cream in a freshly baked waffle cone with chocolate sprinkles. What do you think? Where do you put it? In joy? Okay. What about it when it's gone? All right. Where do you put it? Probably more happiness, because it's a wonderful thing, but it's temporary, and maybe you would have preferred pistachio anyway. So that's another point we can make about that. What about this one? A new baby comes into the family. Joy, unambiguously, because there we're in the realm of the creative activity, God creating the miracle of birth and the relational joy. relationship with people is where joy comes from too. We'll talk about that. And, what about this one? Last one. An amazing answered prayer after years of waiting. Where do you put it? Joy? Joy? Yeah, absolutely, because this is the work of God. So we begin to get a sense that, listen, I'm not disparaging happiness at all, but I think we have to begin to gain a bit more acuity, a bit more understanding as to the difference between the two. So let's talk a little bit more about joy from the Torah. And you'll recall last week, I told you the story, and this has been verified even archaeologically, interestingly enough, in various ways we'll talk about another time. But you recall that King Cyrus, the Persian, had a policy with respect to the nations that he had conquered, where he would be very benign and allow people to go back and worship their local deities. In our case, he allowed us to go back to Israel, and first under Ezra, and then under Nehemiah, and the city, the temple was being built, and then you had the completion of the wall around the city. We talked about it last week, so I don't want to get into a lot of detail, but you remember this very odd thing. There the people were celebrating the completion of the wall, but do you remember from last week what the emotion was that the writer describes? What were they doing? Were they dancing and jumping up and down? What were they? Weeping. They were crying. And we talked about why, and maybe it was just the emotional release of all the tension that they were under because bad guys, enemies were threatening to attack and all. But it was around Rosh Hashanah time, and we suggested maybe they were crying because the book of the Torah, maybe Deuteronomy, was being read to them, and they realized, all of this dispersion that we had endured for the past 70 years is a function, we caused it. I mean, we just didn't care about God. We were more concerned about making a living and, fun things, and we were dispersed among the nations. And so they were crying. But you recall what Ezra the scribe, who was reading the Torah, everybody, and there were people stationed around giving the sense in Aramaic, and he said to them, and I'm going to read you the Hebrew here. Tell me if you remember what it means. It's Chedvat Adonai, He Me'uzechem. Do you remember what that means? The joy of the Lord is your uzechem, your strength. The joy of the Lord is your strength. And so the lessons we distilled last week was, number one, living out of joy is what you need when things get tough and there's still a job to do. And I think that's why Ezra said it. You're crying, you're miserable. Hey, this is a day for joy. We finished the wall. But implicit in that is, hey, there's a lot more work to do in rebuilding the temple. So, Chedvat Adonai, the joy of the Lord. Different word than Simcha. That's because there's a whole bunch of words in Hebrew for joy and happiness. Okay, now I want to look at a new passage with you. And you can follow along if you like, or if you just want to listen, that's cool too. Okay, so I want to talk with you about what the prophet of Habbakuk said. And if you've been reading the Daily Devar, which I hope you all are, it's so great. Sue and I read it most every day. Sometimes you miss because you're busy, but then you catch up the next day. Anyhow, we've been in Habbakuk. Now, Habbakuk wrote a little earlier than the events we've been reading so far, because he wrote about the impending invasion of the southern kingdom, Judea, by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. And a prophet sees things with a clarity that most don't have. And he feels it deeply, and he knows what's coming. He knows that this king is going to swoop down from the north, and he is going to wipe out the city and destroy everything. Where everyone else is in a state of collective denial, assuming continuity, listen, we've heard this before, these prophets are a bunch of nudniks, and we're just not paying attention. And that was the collective feeling, even though there have been other prophets like Jeremiah who promised that these things were going to come down. And here you have Habbakuk, and a prophet can feel it. I mean, it's not just seeing like in a teleprompter or something like that. They experience it. It's experiential. They can feel it. They could see it. They could see it coming. They know the misery that's coming because of we had not followed God's Torah. And so here we pick up some of what he said. It's recorded in chapter 3 of the book of Habbakuk. And I'll just read from 16 on, 1 on. And notice this is poetry, because poetry is a very important part of the literary output of the Jews at that time. Okay. I heard, and my heart pounded, my lips quivered at the sound. Decay crept into my bones, and my legs trembled. Yet I will wait patiently for the day of calamity to come on the nation invading us. So he knows it's coming. He feels it. But notice this. Notice the switch, the emotional, mental, total shift he makes in the next verse. Though the fig tree does not bud, and there are no grapes on the vines, picture that, no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails, and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen and no cattle in the stalls, yet will I rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God my Savior. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer and enables me to tread on the heights. Wow. He sees it. He knows it's coming. He's miserable about it. His bones are aching over it, yet he won't stay there. He chooses joy. He chooses joy in the midst of an impending disaster. And so a few observations about joy arise from this little passage. Number one, we learn that joy is a choice. And you have people who have made at some point in their lives, maybe when they were 4 years old, maybe when they were older, you have folks who just make the choice. I'm going the joy route. I am not going to become a pessimistic person. I am not going to allow my clarity, because this joy is not a matter of denial, of not seeing things. It's a matter of response to those things. I am not going to let the issues of life, the ups and downs, the struggles, whether they're individual or corporate, I am not going to allow them to rob my joy. And he mentions praise specifically, and that's very important, because one of the key ways and why we urge everyone to come to services every week and not be home and take the easy way, we urge it in part because praising God together, for example, during the Amidah, is a door to joy. It's gaining that corporate, yes, God, you're fantastic, which is better experienced corporately than individually, although there is room for it individually as well. Thirdly, joy gives us the strength to overcome the greatest of obstacles. And we see that here too. Joy, I'm telling you, as one neuroscientist put it, he said, I'll quote it, I'll give you the exact quote later, but the sense of it is, he says that joy, hold on, I have it as a quote. I'd rather give it to you as a quote a little bit later on. But you get the picture. Joy helps us overcome the biggest of obstacles. And joy as a choice is an indicator of real personal and spiritual maturity. The person who chooses against all the pessimism and all the reasons to be miserable and says, I choose the higher truths, some of which may be unseen and not as immediately available to me as physical things. I choose joy, and that person is a mensch, and that person knows what spiritual maturity is all about. Very encouraging stuff for all of us. Now, let me just ask you, per Habakkuk's situation, might choosing joy at this moment in your life be a good thing and a helpful thing to do? What do you think? Yeah, absolutely, gang. I'm telling you. It is real important. Okay, let's move on. We've talked a little bit about what happened in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, and then we moved back a couple of generations, and we talked about Habbakuk and his knowledge of what was going to occur and his response. Now I want to talk a little bit to you, last passage, from what Yeshua said. All right? And in this passage, Yochanan chapter 16, it's just before what was read in our Besorah portion this morning, and many of you will recognize this. So here's the situation. He's sitting at the last Pesach Seder until one day, again, he says he'll drink the cup of the Pesach with us at the fullness of the kingdom when he returns. We look forward to that day. But in the meantime, he says, this is the last Seder I'm having with you. And he prepares his followers for what is coming. He's getting them ready. It's preparation time. And this was absolutely critical. I just saw the movie Top Gun. Anyone see the new movie Top Gun? Yes. Did you like it? I thought it was like utterly predictable. Too many white teeth. Too much white teeth in that movie, you know. And Tom Cruise didn't look 60. I'm telling you right now, you know, that was. But aside from that, it had some lessons, and it was exciting. It was exciting, and but there's something that resonates with what we're talking about here. That is the preparation that Yeshua does. So I don't want to spoil the movie for you if you want to go see it, but let's just say these top-level jet fighter pilots have to go and do something very difficult, which means they have to take their jets, they have to fly like straight down into a canyon, they got to go straight, just practically hugging the ground. Anti-aircraft missiles are everywhere. Fighter jets are ready to chase them. There's also gum on the floor. You can get caught. No, that's not true. But what I'm saying is that the top guy says, I want to introduce you to your new commander. He's a top professional. This is Tom Cruise he's talking about. And Tom Cruise says, let me prepare you for what has to happen. You've got to fly in, hugging the ground. There's enemy missiles everywhere. You've got to go as fast as you can. You've got to go Mach 10, or, you know, and you've got to go, and you've got to dodge this and dodge that, and everyone's going to be after you because they got to take out a very dangerous target in enemy territory. And he's preparing them. Well, in that spirit, and with this note of humor, but nonetheless, let's get serious about this, when Yeshua is preparing his inner circle for what's going to happen, because they don't understand what's going to happen. I mean, he's intimated, he's even said certain things, but there's almost a kind of supernatural blockage of their understanding. Have you noticed that when you read the text? He talks to them, he says, I have to die, I'm going to be killed by the Gentiles, I'm going to be turned over by our own people, and they just don't get it. Maybe it's just collective denial, or I don't know what the psychological mechanism. But anyhow, he wants to prepare them for what is going to be happening within a matter of hours. Verily, verily, amen va'amen in Hebrew. Verily, truly, I tell you, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. You will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy. And then an example. A woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come. But when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. So with you. Now is your time of grief, but I will see you again, and you will rejoice, and no one will take away your, what's that last word you imagine? Your joy. Exactly right. No one's going to take away your joy. So he's preparing them for what's going to be happening. It's going to be very hard. Within hours, he will be arrested. He'll be tried. They're going to be scattered, etc., etc. Okay. Now, we enter into the minds and hearts of the people who are sitting there at the Seder. And They needed this message, that you're going to see me again, I'm going to be resurrected, and you're going to literally see me again. So over this next couple days, don't imagine that's the end, because you're going to see me again, and you will be joyful. And again, sitting in their shoes as those didn't know exactly what would be happening, had intimations of it, suggestions of it, but nothing that really reached them deeply, and he's preparing them. But what is the answer? The answer ultimately that will propel them forward after he finally is taken back into God's presence is going to be their joy. You're going to have joy. And again, we learned lessons from this. Joy comes from encountering the risen one. For them, it was his physical, actual presence, eating with him, touching his wounds, all those what they call post-resurrection appearances, where he interacts with them, that there's no doubt that what they're seeing is not a collective grief-induced hallucination, but rather what they're seeing and experiencing and touching was the real guy, because they needed the joy coming from that actual evidence of his being with them. We don't have the privilege of seeing him in quite that way, but for our mission also. That's why objective evidence for the resurrection, the miracles are so important, as well as our encounter with him by the Ruach. All these things intended to produce joy, because we need joy to fulfill our mission as a Messianic Jewish community. Okay, so last but not least, I want to be real practical, and I just want to tell you what I have found to be helpful in cultivating joy, and bring it from the lofty stratosphere into decisions you can make if you want to. But I guarantee you, if you do them, your joy quotient is going to go up, and your capacity to be successful and productive for God especially, but for in life in general, will take a head in a very positive direction. Okay, number one, I want to suggest you got to trust the power of joy. You got to trust it. Trust the power of joy. This is the time-honored experience of biblical characters and of humanity, I think in a broader sense as well. You trust the power of joy to take you places that you need to go, and it is the best way to get there, okay? Here's the quote: "Our brains run on joy the way our car runs on gas." It's not a little thing, and even science supports this, and we've talked about it in one of my earlier drashes. Okay, now here's the thing though. Living in joy takes practice. It's not automatic for most, although sometimes there are people who, in this room, gravitate to joy. Let me just name them in a friendly way, and I don't mention you because of any kind of idealization or you have to live up to something, but Freddie Van Kai, you have a joy gravitation. You just do. You just do. It's where you feel comfortable. It's what gets you through life, without whatever its disappointments and challenges and blessings. You have it. I want to name someone else here who has it. Where's Gloria? Gloria. Am I right or am I right? A joy gravitation. She just gets it. I don't know whether a little muchacha in the old country when you got it. Well, whenever you got it, you demonstrate it for us, and we learn from you. Thank you, Fred, and thank you, Gloria. And what about Diane Cohen? You read her things? Joy gravitation. And she accomplishes an awful lot in life as a lawyer, and as a wife, and as a mom, and as a grandmother, and she and Sid are working at camp, you know. I mean, amazing. And being such a blessing. Joy. Joy. They get it. I hope we'll get it. But we have to have a strategy because it doesn't come naturally to all of us, okay? So I want to suggest something that I have done that I want to suggest to you. And it was suggested to me in an excellent book that I'll recommend to you another time. What you want to do is create a list of ideally 10 experiences in your life where you experienced real joy. 10 things. Now, when I heard this or read it initially, I thought that should be easy. It is not easy. Because they're asking, the idea is the things that gave you deep and resonant joy, which you felt even in your body as you think about what occurred. I experience, when I look back at joyful things and experience them, as kind of an expansion of the chest. It feels like expansion, and it's wonderful. So go back, and over time, took me a couple of weeks, I came up with my 10, and then what you want to do is every day spend 5 minutes consciously re-experiencing how it felt, how you experienced it. Recreate it. Go back in a little emotional and mental time machine and re-experience those joyful moments. Why? Because what this does, even at a physical level, it creates neural pathways, we're told by the experts, that just will get you more into the joy mode and allow joy to become progressively more and more your set point through the ups and downs of life. And so I've started to do, I'll tell you a couple of mine. A lot of them are too personal. I don't want to tell you. But here's one. So several years ago, Rabbi Mark Kinzer led the Hazikaron, the remembrance of Yeshua's last Seder. And he led it for us, and it was in the framework of the Amidah, and it was done with such excellence that I had tears of joy at the end as Mark put together the integrity of the Jewish experience and the wonder of Yeshua's person. And he put it together in a way that is so magnificent. For me, it was one of the most joyful moments of certainly my adult life, and I try and think about it often. Like I say, every day you want to go through your list. I'll give you one more. So there it was, December 30th, 1977. Snowy day, Lansdale Hospital in Pennsylvania. And I met my eldest son, at that time only son, eldest son, David. This little teeny guy, right? Little teeny guy, small. And I went home and I wrote him a song. I've played it for him. I haven't played it for him in a long time. First, I don't write songs, but this one I wrote. Maybe you can enter into it with me a little bit. Your chest expands. You feel large. You feel connected to the universe and connected to God in a way that's so satisfying. Let me tell you, the coffee Oreo ice cream, though it's my favorite flavor, doesn't come anywhere near. You see? So I want to recommend these things to you. I've got my 10, but you've got to come up with yours. The deepest joy comes from encountering God every day, time with Him every day. That's the true role of the daily Devar, by the way. Reading the daily Devar every day. You encounter God, and you begin to experience more and more what I call the joy of the big wow. I made that up. The joy of the big wow. You don't experience the big wow every day. You can't. You're busy. You're getting ready for work, But sometimes it just comes into you and you go, wow. And I really recommend that to you. So in conclusion, look, I've said this on numerous occasions. It's my deepest conviction we are in a unique period of history that is more difficult, more challenging, more confusing than any I remember. I remember the Kennedy assassination, the Vietnam War, 9/11, forget about. And I want to tell you, this period, I think we need joy more now than in memory. But we always do, and all human beings do at all times. And I want to commend to you joy. We are not going to be defeated as a Messianic Jewish community. We're going to walk in victory no matter what comes. We're going to rely on each other. We're going to pray together. I want to encourage more of you to pray out loud during the Amidah. Don't do it for you, do it for us. It's a mitzvah. It's a kindness when your joy and your expression of praise mixes with others, and we all walk out of here feeling glad to have come. I'm being very serious about that. We have the privilege and the obligation of seeking joy. So I want to say, go for it, because Chedvat Adonai, He me'umechem. The joy of the Lord is all of our strength. Shabbat shalom, everyone.